The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man, whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table he could hardly hold. The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man, whose eyes had become dim, his ears... Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I have totally boomer issues today.
I was like playing the story first. I mean, I was like, we could just roll with this.
Yeah, I didn't think of typing chats while having short keys for the stories and everything, so I'm sorry I had to cut Beethoven short for everyone, but I thought I shouldn't just keep messing things up.
It happens, it happens.
It does. But welcome to Heart of Europe, everyone. I am the Boomer Lynx, apparently.
And my name's Katrina. We hope that you've had a lovely Sunday evening and you are ready for some stories. We've got some stories featuring children. We've got a couple of classic ones that you probably heard growing up, and a couple of others that you may not have done. And yeah, it certainly is a very broad theme. Definitely. And children crop up in folklore a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Good evening, everyone in the chat. the Paradox wants me to post a picture of Lunar. I suppose that is Luna. Don't have any plans on putting her on the internet. Informed consent and everything. And good evening, JD. Sorry. Those letters are in the wrong order for my brain, apparently. And good evening, or no, it's good to see you. So,
Hello, Fornal, and JD, and Dee Dee. Welcome to all of you.
yeah.
Good to see my bods around here. Hello, Dub Power.
Just so everyone knows, I will not be posting in the chats with my hotkeys, so apparently this ends up being a chatless stream for me. Oh well. I was thinking we could actually start with the first story now. It is a very short one and a good segue for the show we had on our elders before summer. So, just to bridge the themes a bit. So,
yeah,
elders.
I think we should do that.
Yeah. Okay, roll story. The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table he could hardly hold a spoon, and spilt the broth upon the tablecloth, or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, so the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove. And they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it. And he used to look towards the table, with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing, and only sighed. Then they bought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus, when the little grandson of 4 years old began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and presently began to cry. Then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. So yeah, I do find that story to be quite interesting. One of those little short ones that are quite heavy on the moral thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it goes with treat people like you want others to treat yourselves. And one thing that came to mind with this one was actually how it might relate to these days, with parents sending their children to kindergarten, and then the kids send the parents to the care homes when they're old. That isn't to say that's not to say that it comes to a point where you do need help. So I'm not dissing that at all. But the taking care of the old generations have and the young generation have sort of been lost in the last decade. So That was something that definitely
Absolutely,
came
yeah.
to mind.
Yeah, and it's sort of a classic, like short moral tale, which is definitely one of the stated purposes of tales and rhymes for children. Um, you see, when I was researching children and folklore, what actually came up was sort of playground rhymes and these stories that you tell children to teach basic moral lessons and the oral tradition. And two names that kept cropping up were Iona and Peter Opie, who did a lot of research into what they call child law, um, which is the folklore or folk culture of children. And they included, for example, rhymes and games that got played in the school playground in that, and stories that even children would share among themselves. But certainly, there's these uh, there's these small moral tales included in that, as well as nursery rhymes. And I kind of felt that that was an interesting branch of anthropology, looking at that from the sort of social purpose viewpoint of it. For example, they had a lot of stuff on the purpose of nursery rhymes, which seem ostensibly, just pointless as a sort of vital keystone in language development. And it was quite good sort of comparative study on how a lot of these things are the same all over a lot of different cultures all over the world, actually. And of course, a lot of the small moral stories, particularly from Europe, are going to be very similar. So I think that was an interesting thing to stumble across.
Yeah, definitely. I came across earlier today how the Brothers Grimm usually included several versions of the same story in their books, perhaps even in the appendices, simply because they didn't see a story as the story, but wanted to emphasize that there were differences, regional differences, and how the story would change over time and over retellings, yet keep
Mm.
the core message of the story was still there. So it was really just minor changes. So yeah, that was quite interesting. That was quite an interesting article on symbology in fairy tales, so I can share that link later.
That is definitely very interesting, and you do find that these sort of rhymes and stories passed down in different formats over time,
Yeah,
and they sort of change to adapt to different time periods and cultures, of course, but the main message of them is the same. And I actually found a few analyzations of children's rhymes, actually. Um, for example, somebody thinks the itsy bitsy spider actually teaches a short moral lesson, in that the spider does indeed crawl up the water spout, and then it is washed down again by rain. However, despite despite being washed down by rain, the sun comes up, it dries the spout, and the spider attempts to climb it again. So I sort of came across an interesting theory from them that that was a way of teaching children the moral lesson of perseverance.
yeah,
which might be overthinking Itsy Bitsy Spider a little bit, but it's a theory.
Well, I think that
Yeah.
is quite obvious.
Hmm.
But then I tend to think that way.
Right.
We have a very short
Yeah.
one in Norway where a hunter meets a bird up on the mountain, and she begs him not to
Yeah.
kill her children. And the hunter asks, well, how should I know who your children are? Oh, they're the most beautiful children, so you'll definitely know them. And a while later, he comes back and has shot all of her children. And she said, oh, why did you kill my children? You promised you wouldn't do that. And he just, these were children. I thought they were beautiful. So, every parent thinks their own children are the most beautiful in the world. So,
Yeah, exactly. So that is a very poignant, sad little story there. Yeah.
Yeah. As for the buffering, I have been experimenting with live backgrounds to the stories, so that might be taxing.
It
So
might be.
yeah,
Yeah, it might be taxing a machine.
Yeah, I can pause the background for the other stories.
Okay. I'm just gonna look at what the chat's doing. What are the chats saying? How did the D live chat get onto Marquis de Sade? D live. What? Always D live causing trouble here.
Yeah, well, you could say that it was, and
to be fair, this time it was the Paradox's fault, DDJ. Oh dear.
I could say that the Marquis was an interesting guy, at least notorious, infamous.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What's up on YouTube?
Definitely not the sort of stories we'll be telling.
Nope. Absolutely not. We're doing Dante's Inferno, which is quite grisly enough, to be honest. So,
yeah,
come on. We're not going to get into the Marquis. Absolutely not.
No, even though we are covering Lost, we are not going to include the Marquis de Sade in that.
Nope.
Nope, this is not 7.
So, who's on YouTube? Hello, JD, J-Link, Ragnar's turned up. Hiya. Who is Mrs. Banfield? Didi. Don't really know. Yeah. That is YouTube crowd.
Yeah. So, should we...
Oh, J-Link's gone to the man... Got a man bun. J-Link's got a man bun.
Get rid of the man bun. I will get my scissors out for man buns.
Well, he mistyped it, and I think it actually says... It says man bum.
Okay, I'll not get my scissors out for that.
Oh dear.
But all men listening, or young boys or anything, man buns are condemned to death. Sorry. That's just the way it is.
No man buns. Don't do it. I mean, if you want to have long hair, look up some of like the Viking hairstyles and stuff. Yeah, that's your best bet.
Yeah, but not a bun.
I mean, to be fair, if you can grow a beard long enough to braid it, more power to you, I guess. That's impressive beard growing.
Yeah.
But yeah. Apparently we're now expressing our opinions on men's hairstyles, but there you are.
Yeah, well, it's man buns.
It is man buns.
They should be illegal.
We got Didi started on his hair again. Oh, yeah. Great.
Oh, there.
We better have another story.
Yeah, that is Pandora's box. Or these hairy
Yes.
books or something.
But oh, that's sounds a bit wrong.
Yeah,
Not gonna
I
lie,
know. I
a little
couldn't
bit.
help I couldn't help myself.
Oh dear. Right.
Yeah,
Let's have let's have
we
another story. I think. Yeah.
yeah, the handless maiden was up, wasn't it?
Yes, and that is one which I certainly do want to get into because I thought that was very, very symbolic and very rich, and it is actually a bit of folklore collected by the Brothers Grimm.
Okay, let's hear the handless maiden.
The Handless Maiden. Once there was a miller who had fallen into poverty. His mill was broken, so he had to go to the forest to chop wood. One day, when he was hacking at a tree stump, an old man appeared and said, "I'll make you rich if you give me what stands behind your mill." The miller assumed the old man was talking about the apple tree out back, so he agreed to the deal, $signs flashing in his eyes. The old man told the miller he would return in 3 years to take what was his, and then he vanished. The miller returned home, and his wife asked about their newfound wealth. The house was filled with expensive furniture, and their clothes were new and clean. Better than that, the mill was working again, faster and more efficiently. The miller, grinning ear to ear, explained about the old man and the apple tree. But the miller's wife was horrified. "You stupid old duffer!" she cried. "Our daughter was standing behind the mill, and that old man was the devil." Indeed, the miller's daughter was sat beside the apple tree, beautiful, pious, and oblivious to her fate. At last, the dreadful day arrived when the devil would come to claim his payment, the maiden. That morning, the girl washed and drew a circle around herself with chalk. The devil appeared, but couldn't come near her. Furious, he demanded that she must not wash herself again, and then he left. When the devil returned the next day, the maiden wept, and her tears ran down her arms to her hands, washing her clean, so that the devil still couldn't touch her. Enraged, he ordered the girl's father to cut off her hands, so she couldn't weep on them. The miller was shocked, and tried to refuse, but the devil threatened to kill him, his wife, and everything around the mill. Quaking in his boots, the miller approached his daughter and begged her forgiveness. She replied, "I am your daughter. Do with me what you will." The miller took his sharpest axe and cut off both of her hands. The maiden wept, and her tears ran down her arms and mingled with the blood that poured from her stumps. When the devil returned once more, he tried to claim his prize, but still couldn't touch the maiden, for her tears had washed the stumps clean. Muttering darkly to himself, the devil slunk back off into the forest. The devil retreated into the forest, and the maiden's parents did their best to care for their daughter. Her father begged her to stay, promising to provide everything she could ever want or need, but she refused. She had her bloody stumps cleaned and bound in fresh white gauze, and then set out towards the forest. The maiden wandered this way and that, not knowing where she was going. She walked all day and stopped at nightfall. She had arrived at a royal garden, and in the moonlight could see the trees covered with fruit. She was so hungry she could barely stand, but she couldn't enter the garden because it was surrounded by a moat. She fell to her knees, famished. Suddenly, an angel appeared, a beautiful white spirit who made a dam in the water. After a short while, the moat dried up, and the maiden was able to walk across and enter the garden. There she saw lines of trees, heavy with ripe pears, but she couldn't reach them with her stumps. One of the trees, perceiving her need, bent a branch towards the maiden, and so, using only her mouth, she was able to eat a pear, the juice running down her chin. The angel stood and watched as the maiden ate. Across the garden, hiding behind a tree, stood the gardener. He also watched the maiden, and the spirit by her side, but he didn't interfere. He knew magic when he saw it, and let the maiden be. Finally, after eating just one pear, the maiden retreated across the drained moat and disappeared into the forest. The next day the king was walking in his garden, counting his pears, for he knew exactly how many were on each tree, and when he realized that one was missing, he called the gardener and questioned him. The gardener explained to the king what he had witnessed the night before. A spirit without hands had been led into the garden by an angel, and had eaten one of the pears. The king was curious, and so that night decided to watch the garden and took his magician with him. He waited until the moon was high in the sky before he saw a strange sight. Out of the forest came a maiden without hands, accompanied by an angel, who led her across the dry moat and into the garden. Once there, the maiden began to eat a pear, just as the gardener had described. The magician approached the maiden and asked, "Are you of this world, or not of this world?" The maiden replied, "I was once of the world, and yet I am not of this world." The magician returned to the king, who was eager to know, "Is she human or spirit?" The magician replied, "She is both." The king rushed to the maiden and promised not to forsake her, and took her to his castle. He loved the maiden with all his heart, and had a pair of silver hands made for her, and then took her as his wife. And so the maiden became a queen with beautiful silver hands. The queen stayed in the castle, and the king lavished her with love and care. But in time he had to leave to wage war in a distant land. Before he left, the king asked his mother to take care of the queen, for she was expecting his child. She must send a letter as soon as the child is born. Some months later, the queen gave birth to a beautiful son, and the king's mother immediately sent a letter with the good news. But the messenger fell asleep by a river along the way. While he was dozing, the devil, who was still brooding over his humiliation in losing the maiden, exchanged the real letter for another. The devil's message informed the king that the queen had given birth to a monster. When the king received the letter, he was shocked, but sent a reply asking his mother to take care of his wife at this terrible time. But once again the messenger fell asleep on his journey. While he dozed beside the river, the devil exchanged the message once more and ordered, "Kill my wife and child." The king's mother couldn't believe her eyes when she received the letter, so she sent another message back to the king for clarification. But the devil played the same trick again and switched the messages, there and back. Finally, the king's mother received a letter that ordered her to save the queen's eyes and tongue to prove to the king that she had been killed. By now the king's mother believed her son had gone quite mad, what with the war and everything, and she had no intention of killing the queen. Instead, she killed a deer, removed its tongue and eyes, and saved them. The king's mother then told the queen that she and her baby son were no longer safe in the castle. The queen must run and go far away and never return. The queen and her son were no longer safe in the castle. And so, with the baby bound to her breast, the queen bid farewell to the king's mother. Weeping, she left the castle and returned to the forest. She wandered, not knowing where she should go or where she would be welcome. She prayed for guidance, and an angel appeared on the path. The angel led the queen to a cottage deep in the woods. Over the door was a sign which read, "Here all dwell free." A maiden in white came to the door and greeted the queen. She welcomed the baby and the queen into her home and took care of their every need. The queen lived in the cottage in the woods for 7 years. One day, as the queen bent over the stream to drink, the child fell from her arms into the water. Frantic, she called for help, and an angel appeared. The angel wanted to know why the queen did not rescue her child. "Because I have no hands," she replied. The angel smiled and said, "Try As the queen plunged her arms into the water and reached for her child, her hands regenerated, and her child was saved. Soon after, the queen left the castle. The king returned for more, but the queen and his child weren't there waiting for him. He asked his mother where they were. She was furious with him and said, "How could you? I did as you ordered, you lunatic." She showed him the eyes and the tongue, and the terrible letters he had sent. The king was shocked and heartbroken. He almost fainted in his grief. When his mother saw the anguish on the king's face, she realized the letters were not from him. She quickly explained that his wife and child were still alive and she had sent them into the forest. The king vowed to find them and said, "I will not eat or drink until I find my wife and child." The king left the castle and wandered for 7 years. As he searched for his wife and child, his hands and face became blackened with dirt, and his beard grew wild until he looked more like an animal than a man. Finally, he came to a cottage in the woods with a sign that read, "Here all dwell free." A maiden dressed in white invited the king inside. He was so exhausted from his search that he lay down and covered his face with a handkerchief. The king slept deeply, and as he slept, the handkerchief slipped from his face. He awakened to find a beautiful woman and a small child gazing down at him. The woman smiled, for she recognized the man, despite the ingrained filth and crazy beard. "I am your wife, and this is your son," she said. The king wanted to believe her, but couldn't help noticing her hands. She explained, "With grace, my hands have grown back." The maiden in white retrieved the queen's silver hands from a trunk and showed them to the king. The king was overjoyed and embraced his long-lost queen and greeted his son warmly. All three returned to the king's mother, who helped arrange a second wedding. In time they had many more children, and lived happily ever after.
Quite an interesting story there. Definitely touching on several aspects we have talked about before.
Absolutely, it has. And I did see a lot of symbolism that I recognized in this tale. Now, the version I came across of this was on a blog by a person called Jessica Davison, who seems quite influenced by the writing of someone called Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I do agree with some of the interpretation that I've found, but I think this tale can also be extended beyond the individual way in which the sort of analyzation views it. So the main analyzation I found of this, well, not analyzation, that's not really a word, is it? Analysis. There we go, that's the word. But the main analysis I found of this was that all the various different components of this story all represent aspects of the psyche. So the broken mill represents the psyche. It's not functioning, it's not processing information properly. The miller knows there's a problem, so he's looking to bring back fuel to the mill, so he's looking for light and warmth. He's not just sitting about passively, but he wants to take the easy way out of the situation. So he makes this deal with the devil. And then the maiden represents innocence and the naive part of the feminine psyche. And she begins the story standing beside, another symbol of sort of the feminine, the apple tree. The apple tree symbolizes, life and fertility. I mean, to me, Maiden with the apple tree does bring to mind Idun, the keeper of the apples of life. And so that's what apples sort of symbolize to me, that sort of tree of life type motif. And he gives up his apple tree, this miller, and I suppose apples represent knowledge, life, primal knowledge. And he, in agreeing to give up that tree, sort of says, well, that's of no value. But what that then loses him as well is the maiden. So the sort of the next generation, the feminine in bloom, the source of life, it loses him that. And both his daughter and the apple tree seem very undervalued in this story because he doesn't understand that he needs these things. That he needs these well, the analysis I was reading would say he doesn't understand that he needs sort of this aspect of himself. But I really think this tale could be taken beyond a lesson for the individual purely. Personally, I think it's quite ironic that he thinks he's losing some fruit, but what he instead loses is the fruit of his loins, his line. Maybe a warning in there, I think, in the first part of that story, not to give away something for a quick buck that's going to be of long-term benefit to your children. You must look after the tree, which of course is a symbol that often represents the family, or the nation, or the thing which the world is sheltered under, or a central point. That often is what the tree represents. And you don't just sell that off for a quick fix and devalue it, because it will have unintended consequences for your children, which, I don't know about you, Lynx, but that's certainly striking a chord with the environment today. I think
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would also point out Apple's connection to the pentagram and the number 5. When you cut an apple
I'm not really familiar with this. Yeah.
When you cut an apple through the middle so that you expose the core,
Okay.
that represent a pentagram in the formation of it. And the number 5 is also tied to man. 5 is man, 6 is the devil, 7 is God.
So in the sort of the more Christian symbology of the thing.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I do think the symbology is older than Christianity, but I haven't looked into that in many, many years. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I will also say that the apple tree then represent the man's connection to materiality.
Yes.
And with his continued line and everything, so giving away that, he gives away, you could say, his eternal existence in the world, because his line is ended.
That is true. That is true. Like, his daughter's dissociated from him. There, he's essentially got no more line, even if she does survive. But yeah, I thought the next thing I really found interesting is that with the tree sold off, evil and corruption after the initial seduction, which persuades the father to sell the tree off, can infiltrate despite protections put in place with the circle and the washing, and it ultimately leads to the robbing of new generations' ability to act. And I find it interesting that it's disempowered the young woman, because I really think, yes, with the inheritance sold off and the emphasis on a family gone, the women of a nation as well do become disgraced and disempowered and reliant on sort of handouts and grace. And they are sort of forced to go out into the world and fend for themselves, sort of without the backing of the masculine. I don't know what you sort of think about that interpretation there, Lynx.
Yeah, I do seem to think in similar lines. And well, today it's very common to think in the individualistic term. The individual can also be a stand-in for a people or a nation.
Yeah,
and,
I guess, yeah. Well, the two function in quite a similar way in many ways.
Yeah.
Nations do sort of have their own collective personality.
Yeah. Well, the individual people of a people will make up the whole body of that people.
Yeah.
So,
And I suppose their sort of combined energies combine to form a consciousness which is greater than merely the individual
yeah,
in that case.
yeah,
But yeah, like it was put to me that by this analysis that the devil represents the predator and the part of the psyche that's against life and wants to kill the soul before it can grow and learn its true nature. And that will attack when you're not paying attention and come and take advantage of your weaknesses. And I certainly think that that also works on the collective level too.
yeah.
The
The
villa has
uh,
certainly could be representative of a nation that's lost connection to what really matters in
yeah,
life, and he's lost the innocence of the young. Is essentially what he's done. He's betrayed the trust of his young daughter, and the trust between those two generations is then shattered. But the land still seems to recognize who owns it. Like the tree literally bends down to feed the maiden as well. Sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted you there, Links.
I was just bit of a side note. The dancing penguin says to look at Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for the pentagram reference. We have actually done that story around Christmas.
Ah, yes, the
So
pentagram. I know the pentagram has come up a bit on the show before.
yeah, well,
I'm still on the fence about it.
yeah, it's a very old symbol. A lot of information that we can come across today is very inspired by the New Age and Wiccan and everything. So
Yeah, but even to be fair, then even Wiccan is a very old word. So they have it derives from witcher in Old English. So they have borrowed a lot of genuinely old stuff.
yeah, I'm just very skeptical to where they have taken it. Um, at least from what I have come across. Old symbolism is kind of a thorny issue to get an answer from. So because there are so many.
It is complicated.
Yeah, and so much of the information that is easily available is very postmodern, I would say. So it can be a bit hard to get the true meaning of stuff. And thank you
Yeah.
to for Noel for the 5 ice cream. That is very generous of you. Thank you. Yeah, that was my little side note. All done.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's something worth considering that some of these things could genuinely be older, but have been perverted, definitely. Yeah, but I think that it's interesting that it's the mother who immediately becomes aware of what's happened when the miller says. The mother, of course, is an archetype, part of the trinity of feminine forces, the maiden, mother, crone. That's very, very frequently seen. And the portrayal by the father begins an initiation for the maiden as well. Um, Also, she's sort of gone through a ritual purification with the tears and the washing of the stumps before this sort of initiation in which she's robbed of her power to act. And I found the chalk circle quite interesting because the only place where I know that that's cropped up is actually an Indian myth about the abduction of Sita, where the evil king Ravana, king of demons, spots Rama's, who is an avatar of Vishnu Krishna, spots his wife Sita in the forest and falls in love with her instantly. And then he arranges his servant to disguise himself as a golden deer to actually this time tempt Sita directly, as opposed to tempting Sita's father or anyone like that. And there's a guy called Lakshman who draws a circle in the dust around Sita to protect her and tells her not to step out the circle. But and then she steps out of the circle because her feminine pity and empathy is appealed to actually because Ravana turns into an old beggar man, and then Sita's caught and Ravana is able to abduct her despite her calls for help from a magical bird called Jatayu. But evil sort of got hold of her because she's been lured out of the circle. But in this sort of situation, that doesn't actually happen. Like, she stays within the circle and is then safe from the devil. And I guess it's sort of a testament to her sort of connection to the powers of life, and that, you know, she refuses to go with this sort of symbolic death instinct. And I guess she realizes that her father is you know, subsumed by that because they do offer her all the comfort of this bargain which they've made, but she actually rejects that and she goes off into the wilderness by herself rather than, you know, live by the fruits of this sort of unholy bargain that they've made. Which I found very interesting that the chalk circle cropped up because I hadn't heard of an instance of that in directly European myth before, but it seems like quite an old thing that we might share from like the Proto-Indo-European days almost there, which is quite exciting if true.
Yeah, I would also point out that part of the female archetype, so to speak, is an instinct for the need for protection. And when the father makes that deal, he has shown that he can't provide protection. So the trust is broken. So staying there would potentially just end up her being stuck in a situation where she doesn't feel safe. So it's better to seek your own luck, even if you don't have hands. So it is harder to make your own way, but basically just having trust in yourself, and that you will be provided for, and that you will find your way.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that's sort of on the individual level there, it's sort of an independence from the parents as well. Definitely. I find sort of they put some emphasis on the color of the bandages as well. White being the color of a shroud, but also the color of light and life, and often symbolizing resurrection and purity. So she's definitely lost something in this split, but at least she's remained unpolluted. You know,
Yeah.
she's maintained her integrity in this. Now, there's also an idea that the moat represents the Styx that sort of separates the land of the living from the land of the dead. Um, And when you descend into the underworld as a living person, you have to be careful not to touch that river, or you'll be sucked into it and sucked into death. And you may never make it actually back out. But then an angel turns up to help her pass through that river, so she's passed across it without touching it. So she's sort of gone into the world of death or the other world, but not actually died. And I'm kind of wondering who the angel represents. Actually, I think it could represent the Fuga or the fetch, the ancestral spirit, because they are the spirits that could guide us to gather information from the world of the dead without us actually going there. So maybe that represents that she's got in touch with her ancestors a lot more, and she's eating of the pear tree with their help, because we don't really have the means to touch anything in that world. And of course, to myself, yeah, our ancestors do include the gods. They include Heimdall. That's just my personal belief about it. But also then we have the pear that she eats, and that's symbolic as well, definitely. I mean, it's really symbolized prosperity, good health, future happiness, often used to describe the female form, is it not? The pear. They keep in these gossip magazines, they keep talking about pear shapes.
Yeah. And also, fertility. So
yes.
She kind of regains what her father gave away.
Yes, kind of. In part, yes. And they do seem to represent the potential for new life. I sort of agree with the analysis viewpoint there. And it's sort of stated that the pears don't necessarily belong to the king. They sort of belong to nature, but the king is overseeing them, and he is definitely quite particular about his pears, isn't he? Definitely. Knowing how many is on each tree is a strange thing to know about your garden, would you not say?
If you look
especially
at
when
it,
you're not the gardener.
Well, if you look at it literally, then yes, it might seem a bit strange, but it could also be an allegory for his realm, and the king should know what goes on in his realm. He should have control over that.
Yeah, and so he's the one putting sort of order to nature there, being the masculine ordering force behind it, and he knows exactly everything which is going on in his garden. And of course, we know about king and magician archetypes because we were talking about those with Laura Lee, whom we're having on again very soon, next week.
Next Sunday. We're having her on for masculinity, so scene from The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And we've got sort of, I guess we got sort of a male equivalent of the triumvirate in this tale, and because you've got the king, and you've got the magician, and you've got the gardener, and it sort of reminds me of other triumvirates of divines, like, say, for example, Odin, Vili, and Ve. What's interesting about those is Vili means will, and Ve means temple. So we've got sort of the story of what they provide. I think Odin provides thought. I think Vili maybe provides the life force, and Vey provides spirit. And I see the gardener as someone who is quite like Odin, providing sort of inspiration and, you know, nurture there. And the king is like the conscious intention of the creation, the ordering force, and the magician seems like someone who can also discern the sacred. And certainly a society has to have all of those things. So at that point, the masculine there seems to have all its aspects, but I guess they've come a the feminine has now come along. Oh, there is the king's mother in the equation as well, who will come into things.
Yeah, just have to let in Luna. I'll be right back.
How is Luna? Oh, she's good. Yeah,
Thank you.
they want pics of her. They want cat pictures. Yeah. Yeah, but the idea of a masculine triumvirate that sort of is the mirror image of the feminine triumvirate. It goes back a very long way. It might be sort of that, in particular, the Odin Vili Vey trinity sort of dates back to when Proto-Germanic language was spoken. That's a lot before the Viking Age and stuff like that. So the masculine triumvirate is a very old thing. And it isn't necessarily the creating force, because that's older and more primal, but they do sort of tend to carry out the sacrifice or the ordering sort of necessary to create the earth as is now and put everything in the order it is now. And there's a lot of gods, particularly in the Northwest Germanic pantheon, where this story is from, that one could arguably group into a three as well. That's a little bit of a diversion, but I think it's quite interesting. So yeah, she is eaten of the fruit, which is very symbolically feminine, and she unites with the masculine and becomes a queen to his king, a mother. So she's moved on somewhat from the father and the betrayal by him now. And she's moved on. She's got a husband, which has always traditionally been the next stage in a woman's life after separation from the father. And I find it interesting. She says she's in the world, but not of it. So she's been stripped of all her ego and her old attachments and desires, I would probably say. Because that's what this phrase sort of typically means when you're looking at Vedic Buddhist sort of meditative traditions. So she has let go of sort of her own desires and stuff, and then she can become a mother. And I would say becoming a mother requires definitely the ability to do that.
Yeah, it is a lot of sacrifice of yourself, of your time, of your freedom, quote unquote freedom. Yeah, I suppose you could say. So, you enter a stage of being the nurturer, and that can be quite a big sacrifice sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, it can be. I mean, it pays back absolutely wonderful.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Rewards. It's like just the way in which your line in which you live on, in which you may share everything you know with another being, and it's one of the most glorious things. But yeah, I feel like she hasn't still developed like fully as a person, and she or the feminine isn't quite worthy of queenhood yet. Like she's not whole, and I'm just sort of reminded with these silver hands about the story of Nuada, who can't rule again properly in Ireland until he's whole again. Um, what happens is Nuada is the king of the Tuatha De Danann. He loses his arm in a battle, and he gets made a beautiful new replacement silver arm by Dian Cecht, but he can't be king of Ireland if he's not whole. So some nasty half Fomorian guy, Fomorians are generally the bad guys in Irish mythology, he has to rule until Nuada can be made whole again, and Dian Cecht finds him, finds a way to make him a proper, actual flesh and blood arm, and so she still can't quite act for herself, and what man can create for her is no substitute for her own natural hands. And I guess maybe on an individual level, maybe that symbolizes that she's still trapped in someone else's role for her. She isn't doing things with initiative and individuality. I guess, again, that, this is a symbol of the masculine really becoming maybe overly dominant now over the feminine nature. I think that kind of related to our own society at one time, because the feminine was wounded by the nation selling off the inheritance and devaluing the family, and has therefore lost her ability to touch and care. And therefore, you do have to bring in poor substitutes for that care.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you can't substitute that with rationality and progress and mechanical silver hands.
No, you have to actually find it. It does remind me of King Arthur, and the saying that he is going to heal and then return to the land. So the king has to be whole in order to rule. It also reminds me of quite a few Viking Age burials of the Scandinavians. There's hints that it was important for them to be, when they had died in battle, it was important that they were buried with all of their parts, where substitutes had been laid in the grave if a part couldn't be found. So
yes,
there was one grave found in England from the very late stages of when the Scandinavians were there. And there had been a battle, and one warrior had been castrated when he was struck down by multiple people. And apparently they couldn't find his manly parts when he was buried, so they buried him with a replacement for that, so that he could be whole in the afterlife.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very.
So yeah, they sort of did do this thing where you replace body parts so you can be somewhat whole again when you go to the afterlife. Just to pick something up in the chat, DDJ said the Formoi weren't good guys. I'm pretty sure I said they were bad guys, because I know that the Formoi were bad people in Irish mythology. Wudifu was the replacement.
I don't remember what the replacement was.
A silver penis? Maybe.
I don't think it was that, but they definitely had a surrogate penis in there. I don't remember what it was. I read about it quite a few years ago. It seems like most of the stuff I've read many years ago. Jack T also wondered what was trusted sources, with the contemporary view being very postmodern. Go to the original source when possible.
Yes. Yeah, always go to basically the oldest book you can find.
Yeah, and when it comes to translations, find something that was done before World War II.
Yes. Yeah, so that's gonna be your sort of like not trying to project agendas onto it mostly. I mean, you still have to watch for it with Victorians and classical myths.
Yeah, of course.
But generally, the older you go, the less skewed you're gonna get, and you should definitely, when you're looking at modern translations, you should definitely always look for people who are a minimum classical liberal, because at least they'll be trying to do it in a non-biased way. But I think Imperium Press is probably publishing a lot more of books and stuff with sort of interpretations that are more inclined towards getting to the truth of the actual matter. Like quite a lot of the stuff they put out. I mean, if you want to look at the meaning of myths and symbols across cultures and stuff, I would always recommend Eliada and Evola. I definitely think that they're a good read.
Yeah, and with translations, if you have time and everything, try to look at a few different translations, all of them before World War II, and preferably some who were written not within the same group. Then you can end up with groupthink. So
yeah,
try to get a few different perspectives of it, but don't completely rely on interpretations. About a piece of work. Read the actual work.
Because like here, I've found a story with an interpretation, and I guess I could have just recited that wholesale, but I feel for myself more like the story could be about broader things than the individual. So that's what I've kind of gone with there. So you got to trust your own gut instinct about things as well.
Yeah, and train up your discernment.
Yeah, because a lot of the times you will have to go to modern studies, you will have to go to modern interpretations, and you will have to read between the lines to see what's truth and what's ideological insertion, and you can kind of do that by seeing what doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Seeing what really seems to be a tenuous link. But yeah, we hope that's useful.
Yeah. It is a bit of a minefield. So
it is for sure. But yeah, so we were saying that the feminine has lost ability to touch and care, and you're having to bring in poor substitutes for that care. And I guess so one could argue that for a time our society did get caught up in nothing but means and progress and rationality, and the society here is maybe still not fully enabling the feminine to act as it should. So of course the corrupting forces can then get at the children, and I find it meaningful that the devil does everything he can to muddy the waters of communication between man and woman until the two go away from each other. And interestingly, that women have been convinced these days that the masculine is out to hurt them.
Yeah.
That it's toxic. It's very, very interesting, very prescient.
Yeah, I've never really understood that. That's never been my view of men or the masculine. Quite the contrary, I have actually been more inclined to have to miss the healthy masculine principle being strongly present in our society.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised myself with sort of very conflicting ideas about it because, of course, I knew what sort of men that I found attractive or admirable, but then at the same time, um, people were telling me it was solely men's fault that I was being kept in a sort of box of femininity that I didn't want to be in. I guess what I didn't realize is that the modern femininity I was experiencing was not true femininity.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah, I saw through that quite early on, so I felt quite lost. Maybe like the girl in this story. I had to find my way alone in that. So, which definitely hasn't been an easy road all of the time.
No, it's not always easy. And, just like men, women don't have a lot of role models to properly guide them in the rites and passages of their gender or sex, really, because there is no gender. Um, and that is very difficult for young women coming up. It was difficult for me. It's probably even more difficult for young women now.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
I definitely feel like I dodged the bullet being born when I was born in many ways. So, seeing my generation have things deteriorate even more than from when I was a kid. So, yeah.
That's true.
When I do look at it, it can be a bit overwhelming.
Absolutely, it can be.
The whole situation. And I am not an academic researcher on any other scale than a hobby scale, but I do like to find the truth and a more objective view of things. So you could say that I'm very much into natural law, and basically everything is not going into natural law at all. I'm traditionally minded. That was Jack T asking about us.
Yeah, for myself, like I have qualifications at university level. I have researched in the past, but that's not something that I'm doing currently. I like to research. It can be very hard to get hold of stuff as an amateur, though, because a lot of things are just locked behind paywalls as well. So I'm not really an academic researcher, no. I'm a lot more of an amateur sort of researcher about things.
Yeah.
But yeah. I do find it kind of interesting in this story that the king goes away to fight a war and leaves presumably his magician, his gardener, his pairs, his wife, to go and do that. So I guess the will has gone away from that kingdom. The will is focused on something else, and our men did go off to fight wars that they didn't really have to.
Yeah,
And
I
our nations
definitely.
did get concerned with a lot of petty power gains, really, didn't they?
Yeah, we'll say for some factions it might have been a way to simply exercise their troops, keep them in shape.
Mm.
In particular, when it was against someone that was definitely weaker than them. So
Yeah. But yeah, during that time, I guess women of the time of war, women have to shoulder the burden of being sort of both men and women because they're left trying to fill the gaps that the men being away causes. And the king's mother, for example, seems to be trying her best to manage the kingdom in his absence because he's fighting a war.
yeah,
But doesn't seem to think about these letters so much and question them. I mean, she gets quite scared. There's miscommunication happening a lot when the strong masculine force is away from the kingdom.
yeah. I do definitely see it as a picture of general miscommunication, but
Yeah,
also how distance changed things. Yet the mother knew that that wasn't her son. Uh, that
yeah, that he's at
something
least
was wrong.
been changed or corrupted. So it's also a portrayal of a mother's instinct
Yeah,
about these things
yeah,
being quite accurate.
yeah, and doing her best to protect all parts
Yeah.
of that.
But I guess all the feminine can then do when the masculine is sort of seems to be ranged against it is just flee,
Yeah,
which is what the girl in the story does. So they've sort of been driven away from each other at this point by corrupting forces. And then we have that she gets her ability to act back by having the courage to reach out and save her child. It seems to be the maternal instinct that restores her um, to full wholeness. And that seems to be then connected with the sacred, with the angel turning back up in the story. And the young masculine has to stop focusing on silly distractions, realize what he just lost, and go actively seeking the feminine again after he realizes, his kingdom's been infiltrated while he was away. And so both are really having to make the effort when they are united again properly with sort of the old mother's blessing. And I sort of agree that she might symbolize nature here.
yeah. Also, with how his appearances change as he's looking. I think it's a good image of how the female influence can be civilizing on a man.
Yeah, I
It can
haven't quite
help
considered that. Mm.
when a balanced female influence is in a man's life. It can push him to act better, be better. There's something to strive for there. And when that is gone, it can be easy to just let oneself fall and become a bit more animalistic, more focused on based instinct and all of
Yeah,
that. So
yeah. There's a little bit of talk about feminism in the chat, and I really think that feminism is what happens through devaluation of the feminine, to be honest, because it's women basically trying to be the exact same thing as men
Yeah.
and failing.
Yeah. Good evening, Jewel. Good to see you over on YouTube.
Hello, Jewel. Nice.
Definitely.
What's going on YouTube? J-Link could eat a pear because he's eaten too many eggs.
Yeah.
Hi, Aod.
I would say the main weapon of feminism is to demasculate the man and defeminize the women. So it's sort of a two blow in one.
Yeah. I would say it's just like almost like swap the roles. I mean, it used to be just women having the exact same jobs as men, everybody just being sort of some sort of exactly equal, which is ridiculous. And now it's like, let's all be amorphous, genderless blobs.
Yeah.
That seems to be the logical end of where it's progressed to. I'd just like to shout out Staffordshire Folklore in the chat. Thanks for saying that we have good radio voices for reading things like this clearly. I would like to encourage people to check out Staffordshire Folklore's channel. A couple of very good videos there. Seems to be getting off the ground, and it's if you're interested in sort of regional British stuff, Staffordshire Folklore is covering mostly the Black Country at the moment. It's Staffordshire Folklore.
Yeah, definitely go
Nice
and
channel.
give a follow.
Yeah. That's yeah. So DI's sort of got in a little discussion as well about the connection between feminism and the forces sort of destabilizing Europe at the moment, which are surely very connected, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. In particular, when you do go and look at the origin and all of that, you might start to notice a few things.
You might indeed. But yeah, that was sort of my interpretation of that story. And I took it to be quite a lot, or maybe I'm reading into it from the perspective of what can be seen of it in our age. But I did take it to be about gender relations.
Yeah, and also finding strength in oneself.
Yeah.
I would also like to point out that the girl recognizes the king, even though it doesn't look like anything it looked like before. And I do think that is because she has found her own strength, her own grounding in herself, symbolized with her hands.
I suppose Laura Lee would call it inner queenship. That's the term she was using a lot.
Yeah, definitely. She has come into her own and everything, and she can clearly see her husband. So, yeah, it's a good story.
Yeah, very, very rich in symbolism indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of symbolism in there. And I think there's some stuff we didn't even quite touch on. Like the river that her baby falls into and stuff like that. Let's have to have a bit more of maybe a think about that.
Yeah, well, there's only so much time in an evening, and
Exactly. So we better have the next story.
Yeah, this one is quite a classic, and I do believe everyone has heard it before. So here is my take on that story. Hansel and Gretel, a fairy tale by the brothers Grimm. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife, and his 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's Gretel. They had very little to bite or to sup, and once, when there was a great dearth in the land, the man could not even gain the daily bread. As he lay in bed one night thinking of this, and turning and tossing, he sighed heavily and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children. There is nothing left for ourselves." "I will tell you what, husband," answered the wife. "We will take the children early in the morning into the forest where it is thickest. We will make them a fire, and we will give them each a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be quit of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I cannot do that. I cannot find in my heart to take my children into the forest and leave them there alone. The wild animals would soon come and devour them." "Oh, you fool," said she. "Then we will all 4 starve. You had better get the coffins ready." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The 2 children had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly and said to Hansel, "It is all over with us." "Do be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel, "and do not fret. I will manage something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white flints that lay in the front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped and filled the pocket of his coat as full as it would hold. Then he went back again and said to Gretel, "Be easy, dear little sister, and go to sleep quietly. God will not forsake us," and laid himself down again in his bed. When the day was breaking, and before the sun had risen, the wife came and awakened the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones. We are going into the forest to cut wood." Then she gave them each a piece of bread and said, "This is for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel carried the bread under her apron, for Hansel had his pockets full of the flints. Then they set off all together on their way to the forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood still and looked back towards the house. And this he did again and again, till his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my white kitten, who is sitting up on the roof to bid me goodbye." "You young fool," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, but the sunshine on the chimney pot." Of course, Hansel had not been looking at his kitten, but had been taking, every now and then, a flint from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father told the children to collect wood to make a fire to keep them warm. And Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood enough for a little mountain, and it was set on fire. And when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest yourself, you children, and we will go and cut wood. And when we are ready, we will come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their pieces of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe. But really it was only a dry branch hanging to a withered tree that the wind moved to and fro. So when they had stayed there a long time, their eyelids closed with weariness, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry and said, "How shall we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, saying, "Wait a little while longer, until the moon rises, and then we can easily find the way home." And when the full moon got up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the way where the flintstones shone like silver and showed them the road. They walked on the whole night through, and at the break of day they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why did you sleep so long in the wood? We thought you were never coming home again." But the father was glad, for it had gone to his heart to leave them both in the woods alone. Not very long after that, there was again great scarcity in those parts, and the children heard their mother say at night in bed to their father, "Everything is finished up. We only have half a loaf, and after that the tale comes to an end. The children must be off. We will take them farther into the woods this time, so that they shall not be able to find a way back again. There is no other way to manage." The man felt sad at heart, and he thought, it would be better to share one's last morsel with one's children. But the wife would listen to nothing that he said, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B too, and when a man has given in once, he has to do it a second time. But the children were not asleep and had heard all the talk. When the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up to go out and get more flintstones, as he did before. But the wife had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. But he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and go to sleep quietly, and God will help us." Early the next morning, the wife came and pulled the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread, less than before, and on the way to the wood, Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket, and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping behind and staring for?" said the father. "I am looking at my little pigeon on the roof to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife. "That is no pigeon, but the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before, and strewed breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, where they had never been before in all their lives. And again there was a large fire made, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you children, and when you are tired you can go to sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are ready to go home, we will come and fetch you." So when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had strewn his along the road. Then they went to sleep, and the evening passed, and no one came for the poor children. When they awoke it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up. Then we shall be able to see the way home by the crumbs of bread that I have scattered all along it." So when the moon rose they got up, but they could find no crumbs of the bread, for the birds of the woods and of the fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way all the same, but they could not. They went on all that night, and the next day from the morning until evening, but they could not find a way out of the wood. And they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but a few berries they could pick up. And when they were so tired that they could no longer drag themselves along, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They were always trying to get back to it, but instead of that, they only found themselves farther in the wood, and if help had not come soon, they would have been starved. About noon, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he had finished, the bird spread his wings and flew before them, and they followed after him until they came to a little house, and the bird perched on the roof. And when they came nearer, they saw that the house was built of bread and roofed with cakes, and the window was of transparent sugar. "We will have some of this," said Hansel, "and make a fine meal. I will eat a piece of the roof, Gretel, and you can have some of the window. That will taste sweet." So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof just to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it. Then they heard a thin voice call out from inside, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Never mind, it is the wind." And they went on eating, never disturbing themselves. Hansel, who had found that the roof tasted very nice, took down a great piece of it, and Gretel pulled out a large round window pane and sat her down and began upon it. Then the door opened, and an aged woman came out, leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened, and they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Ah, my dear children, how come you here? You must come indoors and stay with me. You will be no trouble." So she took them each by the hand and led them into her little house. And there they found a good meal laid out of milk and pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts. After that she showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them and thought they were in heaven. The old woman, although her behavior was so kind, was a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had built a little house on purpose to entice them. And when they were once inside, she used to kill them, cook them, and eat them, and then it was a feast day with her. The witch's eyes were red, and she could not see very far, but she had a keen scent like the beasts, and knew very well when human creatures were near. When she knew that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave a spiteful laugh and said triumphantly, "I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them, and as they lay sleeping so peacefully, with round, rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have." Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand and let him into the stable and shut him up behind the grating, and call and scream as he might, it was no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones! Fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. He is outside in the stable and must be fattened up. And when he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was of no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her. And so the best kind of victuals was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the old woman visited the stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out a finger that I may tell if you will soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone, and the old woman, who had weak eyes, could not see what it was, and supposing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much that he was not getting fatter. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel seemed to remain so thin, she lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now then, Gretel," cried she to the girl, "be quick and draw water. Be Hansel fat or be he lean, tomorrow I must kill and cook him." Oh, what grief for the poor little sister to have to fetch water, and how the tears flowed down over her cheeks. "Dear God, pray help us," cried she. "If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we should have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman. "They are of no avail." Early next morning Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "First we will do the baking," said the old woman. "I have heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel towards the oven, out of which the flames were already shining. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly hot, so that the bread may be baked." And Gretel once in, She meant to shut the door upon her and let her be baked, and then she would have eaten her. But Gretel perceived her intention and said, "I don't know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," said the old woman. "The opening is big enough, do you see? I could get in myself." And she stooped down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push, so that she went in farther, and she shut the iron door upon her and put up the bar. Oh, how frightfully she howled! But Gretel ran away and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door and cried, "Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead!" Then out flew Hansel like a bird from its cage as soon as the door is opened. How rejoiced they both were, how they fell on each other's neck and danced about and kissed each other. And as they had nothing more to fear, they went all over the old witch's house. And in every corner there stood chests of pearls and of precious stones. "This is something better than flintstones," said Hansel as he filled his pockets. And Gretel, thinking she also would like to carry something home with her, filled her apron full. "Now away we go," said Hansel, "if we only can get out of the witch's wood." When they had journeyed a few hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We can never get across this," said Hansel. "I see no stepping stones and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But here comes a white duck. If I ask her, she will help us over." So she cried, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack. Carry us over on her nice white back." And the duck came accordingly, and Hansel got upon her and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel, "that would be too hard upon the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." And that was how it was managed. And after that they went on happily until they came to the wood, and the way grew more and more familiar, till at last they saw in the distance their father's house. Then they ran till they came up to it, rushed in at the door, and fell on their father's neck. The man had not had a quiet hour since he left his children in the wood, but the wife was dead. And when Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones were scattered all over the room, and Hansel took one handful after another out of his pocket. Then all care was at an end, and they lived in great joy together. My tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. So, perhaps this was the original Stranger Danger fairy tale?
I do think so, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
certainly that's the immediate moral one would take from it. And of course, that everything that looks good is not necessarily good for one.
yeah, it just takes my mind to the modern version of Beware of Strangers Who Wants to Give You Candy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it does take the mind to that. Although we seem to be quite hypocritical in the modern age about being aware of strangers.
Oh, definitely.
We don't
That's an
seem to
understatement.
extrapolate that concept beyond the individual level, shall we
No,
say.
it's
I don't
mind-boggling.
think I'll get into any more
No,
than that.
perhaps not. Good evening, Critique Darlin. It's good to see you. Please go give him a follow over on D-Live. He does shows from the Irish situation, so
Nice.
go and check him out.
I critique that land.
This is another one where you could definitely have a lot to say about the fairy tale.
I think so.
in one way, yeah, it's a tale about poverty, starvation, and what you have to do to survive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, there is the stepmother theme again.
Mm. Yeah, that's sort of the non-biological mother not really being the best person for the kids again.
Mm-hmm. I do find the
Uh,
point done by the father very, very interesting. When you have said A, you have to say
mm.
B. If you can be talked into doing something you know is wrong once, then you can definitely do that again.
Yes, yeah. By the way, I would just like to thank Fornell for the diamond. Just notice that we will recapture our destiny.
Yeah,
Fornell says.
we definitely will.
So
And
yeah.
thank you very much.
No, but certainly if you can let yourself be twisted on one of your morals, uh, then it doesn't seem like it would be long before that others your principles would begin to collapse for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah. Uh, and of course, it's the theme of cannibalism, which might not be as straightforward as one might think. Of course, it is the physical aspect of that,
Yeah.
but it's also infusing someone else's
Mm.
life energy into yourself. You can see it with themes of when you ingest something, you ingest the essence of that thing to gain
Mm.
something. And of course, you could see, for example, take a look at the Holodomor shortly
Yeah.
after the Soviet Union was established in Ukraine. Um, when people don't have anything to eat, they can do the unthinkable. So
That is true. That is very true. And that sort of privation and need is overcoming paternal bonds as well,
yeah,
for sure. And I think like a lot of heroines and heroes in European stories, Hansel and Gretel really show a lot of initiative in getting out of that.
yeah, I think their personal journeys are quite interesting. First, it is Hansel finding very logical and practical ways out of the situation, which of course is a very male trait. However, it doesn't go as planned the second time, as of course the crumbs will be eaten. But he tried the best he could with what he had at hand, and that was his piece of bread. Um, and then, and you also see him always protecting his little sister, making sure that she isn't afraid. But
Mm.
then he isn't able to do that anymore when he is imprisoned by the witch.
Yes.
And she has to find her own strength to get out of that and save her brother. And she's only able to do that when that specific situation arrives, when they're both
That's very
about to be
true.
killed. So, and it's not a girl fighting in the way of a man. Yes, she does use her bodily strength to conquer the witch, but it's a woman against a woman. So it's not, the more
Yeah.
warped that we see today with tiny little girls BTFOing grown men, which is
Large
just,
men. Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
A la la Harley Quinn just sort of it does break immersion in fiction, really, when women don't really use realistic ways of dispatching people.
Yeah. And we do see instances where that massively backfires on women, and they've totally been led astray with what their actual physical capacities are, which is just irritating and mind-boggling and very, very sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely very sad indeed, yes.
yeah. And also when they're faced with crossing the water, she is the one who finds the solution with calling for the duck. I do find the animals they see very interesting. They are for the most part all white. Not a pigeon. That isn't said that it was a white pigeon, but first of all, Hansel gives hints to his father that he knows what's going on, with the cat and the pigeon wanting to say goodbye to him. And with the cat being white, I think it symbolizes that he has the solution, but with the pigeon not being white, or at least not mentioned as white, it's a sign that it won't go as he plans this time. Then there is the bird when they are about to starve to death that sings his so-called, you could perhaps see it as a magical song, at least beautiful enough to gain their attention and have them following. The birds often represent divine inspiration, seeing things from above, so that you can get a whole picture. And while it does lead them to the witch, I don't think the bird is connected to the witch. But it was a situation where they came into a dangerous situation, but the alternative was to starve.
Yeah, true. So the bird, typically seen as a spiritual messenger, leads them to something which is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
But it's provided them with a route towards something that there could be a way out of, as opposed to starvation, which is pretty much a dead end.
Yeah, and also the gifts that are given in tales like that, you often have to earn them. So it's not that I did something and then got the reward after earning it, but they were given the gift of life, but they had to earn the keeping of their lives.
Yes. Yeah, I think I get what you mean there. Oh, by the way, Critiqued Island likes the way that you read that story, Lynx.
Thank you.
He says it was maybe it was your voice, but it was very nice. And Urbadurbus in the chat. Urbadurber is certainly a dude who's produced some catchy songs.
Yeah, go
Hello,
give him a
Urbadurber.
follow.
Nice.
Yeah. And also with the witch, you see the children being enticed by a grandmotherly figure and the feeling of being welcome, but they still trusted a stranger, and that might not be the best thing to do.
No. Do not go into the houses of stranger women and woods. Probably not.
No.
Bad idea.
At least be wary. And
especially if they tell you to get in an oven.
Yeah.
West.
Yeah, definitely. And also when you put one of them in a cage, that might be a bad sign.
Yup, definitely bad child cage. That's not an acceptable way to contain children.
No, definitely
Although
not.
maybe parents would maybe some parents would like it if that was an acceptable way to contain children, but it isn't. You can't put them in a cage.
No,
Not allowed.
it can perhaps be tempting at times, but maybe not the best thing to actually do in practice.
Nope.
Hopefully people don't put their children in cages, and if they do, they should be heavily punished.
Indeed.
When it comes to the witch, I don't think it's when it comes in fairy tales, I don't think it's only one source for that. Previously mentioned in the D-Live chat, not to be mentioned on YouTube. But that can definitely be one of the sources for that. I also think it's an image of women who have fully fallen into the dark aspects of the feminine, gone to the dark side, and as such are anti-nature. The more symbolic view of this witch's cannibalism can be the devouring mother. Wanting, wanting to get the child's energy and have that feed her, because she doesn't have any other way of having any strength in herself.
I do think so. I think that sounds like a very reasonable theory. I was just having a look at the chat there. I don't think it so much matters critique down under what the house is made of. I think the versions where the house is made of candy and sweets are maybe just newer versions, I would say, of the tale.
That might be the case. Earlier versions, the house may still be made of some sort of cake, but perhaps not glass made of sugar. Okay, buffering on D-Live, refresh.
I think that's also what I read as a child, actually critiqued Darland as well. They like the candy house sweets, made of sweets.
Yeah, as a child, I think I heard a version of the house being a gingerbread house. And I definitely think that is perhaps not modern, it's more recent. And as
I feel like
gingerbread
said, houses are quite traditional. They've been around for a little while.
I don't know the origin for that recipe. But it's definitely possible that something equivalent was before that. A bit more mundane, you could say. Spices and sugar and everything was extremely expensive back in the day.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. Even we have some what's it called in English? Plates and cups and everything from my great grandparents. And, even the coffee cups, they are tiny. It's like drinking out of a
Yeah.
thimble. But back then, coffee was a real treat.
Very expensive, yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, we have given the dancing penguin diabetes.
Oh, I have.
Apparently.
Or perhaps the story. Well, just stay away from the gingerbread houses in the forest, and your diabetic should be fine.
Yes.
Yeah. I also find it very interesting that when the children come back again, the stepmother has died.
Yes, she has.
Yeah. I will admit my mind did go into, was she really the witch sending the children off to eat them? But that might be a bit of a stretch. But
Yeah, that is a bit of a stretch, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. My mind do like to take some odd turns now and then. But you could definitely say that she was willing to sacrifice the power of life, fertility, and everything, and as such, she starved to death.
Yeah. Bit of a Hansel and Gretel conspiracy theory there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps that should be our next project, conspiracy theories in fairy tales.
Well, we did find that absolutely ridiculous article relating all the fairy stories to absolutely ludicrous stuff.
Yeah, I was howling with laughter when I found that one.
Yes.
Definitely one to be shared. It's the one you read and just, okay, this has to be satire.
Snow White is about communism, apparently. Yes, but that was a very, very strange article indeed.
Oh yeah,
very strange.
Definitely.
I might give that a share for people want to have a laugh.
Oh yeah.
That nonsense. But yeah, we have one last story for tonight. And that's a very short one.
Yeah, I think there was one more point I had.
You had one more point. Okay.
Yeah, or I think I do suspect I might have lost the thread of my thoughts. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yes. So yeah, the last story is a very, very short one. And that's The Boy Who Cried Wolf. And that's one that I wanted to include because it's a very typical moral story, classically told to children, has entered into the general vernacular of sayings. So please do enjoy this version.
Indeed.
The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. A shepherd boy tended his master's sheep near a dark forest, not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was to talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep and the quiet forest, and thinking what he would do should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So now, though he had not seen anything that even remotely looked like a wolf, he ran toward the village, shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" As he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" Again, the villagers ran to help him, only to be laughed at again. then, one evening as the sun was setting behind the forest, and the shadows were creeping out over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from the underbush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran toward the village shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He cannot fool us again," they said. The wolf killed a great many of the boy's sheep, and then slipped away into the forest. Liars are not believed, even when they speak the truth.
So yeah, also one we've all heard many a time, I believe. And quite apt these days, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. Many people making certain things into big issues that do not even know the real meaning of the words being in trouble.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I can't get into exactly who I would say that about, but yes. Crying wolf about certain things may come back to bite people in the butt.
Yeah. In some instances, hopefully it does.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. And oh, what was this? It seems my brain has stopped functioning somewhat.
It's been a long week, hasn't it?
Yeah, one of those weeks.
Certainly. I suppose we are all up quite early on a Monday morning. We do hope you have enjoyed tonight, folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I very much enjoyed getting into those stories. Some very rich symbolism in definitely Hansel and Gretel and the Handless Maiden. Like, I hadn't thought to such an extent like that about the symbolism of Hansel and Gretel. So that's very interesting analysis of something that I grew up with, for sure.
Yeah, when you read the tales again with a slightly different viewpoint, what you see can be very interesting. That's happened with several stories. As a kid, I only saw them as, an interesting story. Some stories I liked and everything, but trying to see a bit more meaning behind them definitely is very rewarding and very fun. And again, I will remind everyone, next Sunday, Laura Lee is coming back.
Mm-hmm. We're going from 8 then, aren't we?
No, I do think we're
still going 7.
Yeah. If it is postponed, we will let you know on Friday evening at the latest, but I do think the new time would suit her. She's over in Canada, so you have to think about the time differences.
Yes, indeed, we do.
Yeah, and this time we will concentrate on the masculine scene from The Lord of the Rings and what that can tell us today, how it can help us in our twisted times, the times of Sauron, you could say.
Thank you very much to Critiqued Island for the donation of 1 diamond just then.
Yes, thank you very much.
A little okay hand sign.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Thank you very much for that. We do appreciate everyone who decides to give us some lemons, diamonds.
Yeah,
Every little bit
absolutely. And we,
helps.
I haven't heard that you could only donate on Entropy using a Google account. You might want to talk to the Entropy team if that occurs. I'm not quite an expert on them, but you might ask them. But we could also look into other venues and diversify it.
Diversify.
Yeah, diversity is a strength, isn't that the motto of today? So
apparently,
yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, with the amount of censoriousness going on, diversity of platforms might be our strength. But yes,
yeah. We will look
we
into
do
that.
just tell the stories round here. You know,
Yeah.
they should really be objecting to that.
No, we do keep it quite neutral. And as mentioned last week, all of our stories are being put up as well. And hopefully that could be a resource for children out there. A bit better than sitting them in front of the TV. The collection is quite large now, I would say. So plenty to choose from. We have started making more playlists, gathering all the grim stories, for example. So yeah, definitely take a look.
Yeah, we just wanted to organize it in terms of what you might want to watch.
Yeah.
And particular folklore collectors. And welcome to Roy Kinson, who just followed.
Yeah, welcome.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
But that unfortunately is the end of our stream. Tonight we have no more stories.
No.
And so we hope you've all enjoyed this stream. We are very delighted to have got to 505 followers on DLive now and 509 YouTube subscribers.
Yay.
That's really cool.
Woohoo.
Great to have passed the 500 mark.
Oh, definitely. This deserves cake.
Yes. Cake.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Without a witch.
No witches. Is there a sticker for cake? I don't know.
There probably
Probably.
There probably is, but I don't have it. Probably. So yeah. I suppose.
Well.
You just have to live without cake sticker. So yeah, that is it for tonight. Have a wonderful Sunday and a wonderful week, and see you next time.
Yes.
Good night.
See you next time, folks.